So we're
sir.
starting now the United States in the Caribbean. Well, we started that topic. Now we're going to look at how the US ruled Cuba. But before we look at how the United States would have governed Cuba, what at what stage or which year the first war would have started? Which year?
Mm. So it's not 1845.
No. What happened in the 1840s though? What the Cubans wanted?
They wanted their independence in the 1840s and started wanting also to be annexed to the US.
So they wanted to be annexed
The 10-year war
to
started
the
in
US.
1868.
1 second, please, Thorpe. Who said that before? Is that
Both, sir.
Bud? Very good. Thank you very much, Bud. Next one.
The 10-year war started in 1868.
So
68.
1868 to all.
Even Austin, hold up, wait, sir. We're jumping over things.
1878.
1840s that annex to US occurred, and in 1845 to 1849, US offered to buy Cuba from Spain. Then 1854 they offered again. So 1845
Yeah.
to 9, the offer to buy Spain. In 54 again, they offered to buy Spain. In 54 as well, that was when the Austin Manifesto happened. Franklin Pierce raised the issue to purchase Cuba. And then we can now move on to 1868 when the 10-year war began, where the Grita de Yara separatist group declared Cuba's independence. The Treaty Zanjan was signed, and in 1891, Cuba signed the Foster-Canovas Agreement.
All right. Thank you very much. So we know for sure that in the 1840s they wanted to be annexed, right? That's a Cuban, and then 1868 to 1878, yeah, the first 10 years war, they didn't win. And then after that, in which year we had the second war starting? And what is the name of that war?
The second war started in 1898 and it's called the Spanish-American War.
You sure?
Sorry, it ended in 1898. It started in 1895. It's called the Cuban War for Independence. I'm sorry.
Yes,
1895 to
98,
1898.
and it's the Cuban War for Independence. And then in 1898, the Spanish-American War began. Sorry.
And then you had the
Spanish-American War in 1898.
1898 from about April
Yes,
to
sir.
November 1898, and this was the
Spanish-American War.
And at the end of the Spanish-American War, what was the name of the treaty that was signed?
The Treaty of Paris.
Yeah.
Very good. The Treaty of Paris. And what was included in that treaty?
The Treaty of Paris stated that Cuba not only gained its independence, but not
So
the
one second. The first part of the treaty said that the Cubans gained their independence.
Yes, sir.
All right. And then after?
The United States paid Spain $20 million to take control of Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and the Pacific islands of Guam and Wake.
So US took control over?
Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and the Pacific islands of Guam and Wake. Really and truly, it's just Guam and Wake.
Puerto Rico,
the Philippines, and Guam and Wake.
The Philippines, Guam, and Wake. Wake, right?
Yes, sir, Wake.
All right, good.
The Spanish-American War was also called a splendid little war because it was only for 4 months.
Just for 4 months, all right. So we have the Treaty of Paris right now. So right now, the war would have ended. Spain left, decide that they are going. In fact, after this war, Spain had no colony in the Americas. Remember, they were the first to colonize, and the Americans put them out of business. So no colony at all. They had no colony in the Americas. And so after the Spanish-American War, the United States occupied Cuba through the military. They are going to send the military into Cuba to occupy Cuba. And they occupied Cuba between 1899 and May 1902. So they occupied Cuba during this period, right? Military. So they were the ones who appointed a army general, somebody who was an army general by the name of John Brooke, and he was appointed as the first military governor of Cuba. Question. You help us to get our independence here. And then between 99, 90, 91, 92, for 4 years, you control us. You make all the decision for us. You put an army person as the, we call it now, as the governor of Cuba. Is that independence?
No, sir.
It is not independence. Anybody else? Is it what you would consider that?
Oh no, sir. That's not independence. I didn't realize my mic was off.
But
That's basically you signing yourself over to another country for them to take control of you. It's just that, first of all, they were under the impression that, okay, you are assisting us, you are being a good neighbor. However, you are really just being a little greedy. We're just really being greedy and like, okay, so we can get you out of from under Spain, but no, we're going to deceive you and say that you're going to be under us without you even knowing that is what you signed up for.
What is their destiny?
Destiny, Mama, look
Is their destiny to expand?
Destination.
That's what Sir would say. To expand.
That was US's prerogative. Their prerogative was not to help Cuba become the free little island. They wanted, well, granted, Cuba is not very little. They wanted Cuba for themselves so that they could have ultimate control over Cuba and its decisions because of Cuba's location, as we know that they wanted to be able to pass by the other like colonies and not
and their geography.
Yeah, all those wonderful stuff. Because of the location of Cuba, it would have allowed them to have a bit more free reign in the Caribbean.
That is true, correct. And so we know for sure that they took control over Cuba for 4 years. Well, initially for 4 years, and they appointed a military governor. Now, the reasons for a military government in Cuba: one, they wanted to make Cuba, as you rightly said, a self-governing protectorate. So they said they didn't want them to make them a colony, but they changed the name from colony to protectorate because remember, Cubans didn't want to be a colony of Spain. So it is like you're exchanging from one colonial master to the next. So they said that they wanted to make Cuba a self-governing. You will govern yourself, but we will protect you. Another reason the reason why they implemented a military government is that they said that they wanted to fix or repair all the destruction that the Cuban War for Independence would have wrought on by the people, and also the Spanish-American War. So they wanted to fix Cuba so that American business can invest. And also they wanted to control Cuba economy. So they said that if we put a military government in place, if we have a military government, then the military government for 4 years will help us to have full control over Cuba. We will protect them. We will fix up the place. We will control their economy. Right? And so these are the reasons why they implemented a military government in Cuba. Now, how did the Americans take over the Cuba without resistance? Clearly, at this point, for 4 years, all of us would have believed that, listen, after we the Cuban people tried to get rid of Spain, now we have the Americans having political control over us. So you can write down this term, political control. So the Americans had political control, but the reasons why the Americans, the Cubans didn't resist is because most of the persons who would have fought in the Cuban War for Independence, they got old. The Americans would have basically bribed the army in Cuba. And those Cubans who were the revolutionaries who fought against Spain, most of those Cubans receive well-paid jobs in American businesses. So you basically quiet them. You tell them to shut up. Because you have good jobs, so why are you going to complain? And then at the same time, the Americans implemented a rural guard. It is like a small little army. So anybody in Cuba that tries to speak out against the US military government or try to put up any resistance against the military government in the US, then they are going to, they have that guard there to put them down, to kill them instantaneously, to lock them up. Right? So one, if we look right here, 1840s, the Cubans wanted to be annexed. Between 1868 to 1878, they fought the first war, the 10 Years' War. 1895 to 1898, the Cuban War for Independence. Then for the latter part of 1898, then the Americans came to the assistance of the Cuban. The Cuban gained their independence. Then immediately after they gained their independence, the US implemented or appointed a military person to be governor of Cuba, to control Cuba politically. And they controlled Cuba for 4 years. Following students? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Following.
All right, good. Now, we know for sure that they had a military governor in Cuba for 4 years. Now, what were some of the benefits or some of the reforms of the military government that was in Cuba? One, the first thing they did was that a population census was carried out. So the first thing the military government that the US appointed there, and all the persons in the government were American Army personnel. So the American army running Cuba, controlling Cuba, governing Cuba. So one of the things that they did was that a population census was done. You count everybody in the population in the country. Count everybody to ensure that you know how many persons are there. They are going to build schools. They built health care centers, clinics, hospitals. Persons who were prisoners by Spain, persons who Spain would have imprisoned, were released from prison. They built road, they built sanitation program. At this time, Cuba had a lot of malaria and yellow fever. They implemented a program that eliminated malaria and yellow fever from Cuba. So these are some of the things that the military government actually did in Cuba. And not only this, but while they were there governing Cuba, trade between the US and the UK, sorry, US and Cuba grew. So there's a lot of export taking place. Right? Now the Cubans now realized that by 1902, they said, listen, we understand that you're doing things, you did a population census, you're building schools, you invest in cattle, you're doing healthcare programs, you release prisoners that Spain had under bondage, you're building roads, but we are not governing ourselves. You are basically governing us. You are ruling us. It seems as if we exchange one political master or one colonial master for another colonial master. In fact, immediately after the war, the Spanish-American War, and after they signed the Treaty of Paris, the Americans had something that was called the Teller Amendment. And the Teller Amendment said that the US had no interest in Cuba, to control Cuba, and once there is peace in Cuba, they are going to leave. Year 1, 1899, no war going in Cuba. Did they leave? Did they leave Cuba?
No.
So 1899, they didn't leave Cuba. 1890, did the military government still in Cuba? The military government was still in Cuba in 1890? Hello?
Yes, sir.
They were still in Cuba. 1891, they were still in Cuba? No, where me get this math from? 1900, sorry, 1899, 1900. 1900, were they still in Cuba?
Yes, sir.
They were still in Cuba. 1901, the US military was still in Cuba.
I think they left in 1902, sir.
And 1902, they were still in Cuba. So for 4 years, they were in Cuba. The Teller Amendment in this year, 1899, they said that once there is peace in Cuba, they are going to leave. They are not interested in Cuba. could we say that the US basically told the Cuban a lie? Was it a lie? Because 1899, you had no war, peace was in Cuba. 1900, peace in Cuba. 1901, peace in Cuba. 1902, peace in Cuba. And they said that once there is peace, they are going to leave, and they are still in Cuba. And so right now, Cubans are going to start to criticize the military government. They are going to criticize the military government. Now, what are some of the criticism that they are going to have? One, they said that Cuban traditions, all the different traditions of the Cubans are being ignored. Cuba is being Americanized. The Americans bring in a lot of color prejudice. I remember they love the color prejudice in the US. Black and white segregate. And so what they are going to do, the US is going to put a color ban in Cuba where blacks could not work in hotels and restaurants. Cubans didn't like that. They didn't like the fact that America is bringing their way of life there. All the textbooks that were used in schools in Cuba were American textbooks. Instead of the US soldiers protecting the Cubans, they get them involved in prostitution. They are building roads, but all the persons they are using to build the roads are Americans. All the cattle industries that were there in Cuba is the Americans that owned it. The Bank of Cuba was now controlled by the Americans. So everything now in Cuba is Americanized. Everything in Cuba is being controlled by the Americans. And the Cubans are saying, listen, you said to us in the Teller Amendment that once we have peace, once Spain leave, then you are going to leave. But for 4 years, you are still here. However, ladies, they are going to leave. The military government is going to leave, right? And what they're going to do is that they're going to formulate a constitution for Cuba. So the US now formulate a constitution. They created a constitution, right? They create a constitution. Now, what is a constitution? The constitution is a body of law. It tells you how law should be made in Cuba or any country, how you make law. The constitution tells you how government should make law, how government should organize, the different rights that citizens have. All right? So these are some of the different rights that citizens have. So these are this is what we call a constitution. Constitution tells you who made the laws, how the laws should be made, how the government should be organized, what rights the citizens have. The US now saying if we are leaving, we should supervise your constitution. We're not going to leave just like that. We're not going to take up ourselves and leave just like that. So the US now is going to implement a policy or attach something to the Cuban Constitution that is called the Platt Amendment. Very important term. So in the Platt Amendment that they are attaching to the Cuban Constitution, the US still have rights to intervene in Cuba, right? Go ahead for me, Lawrence.
Sir, I was just going to agree.
All right, good. So, and other things that they are going to implement. They said Cuba, the US Congress authorized the president to withdraw the American troops and to leave the government and to control the island of Cuba to its people, right? Or to give control of the islands to the Cuban people. Another one is that Cuba could not sign any form of treaty with any other country without consulting the US. Cuba could not borrow any money from anywhere in the world without consulting the US. Anytime there's problem in Cuba, the US had the right to intervene. Is that independence?
No.
So this amendment here, the Platt Amendment, basically gave the US more control over Cuba. Although Cuban people are now able to vote for their own president, but their president could not go and borrow any money, could not sign any treaty, could not do anything without the US giving permission. Go ahead for me, Lawrence.
Sir, I was just going to add to one of the terms that the government should sell or lease land to the US for coaling or naval stations.
Yes. So they are able to lease lands. So they are taking control. So one, on December the 31st, 1901, the first president of Cuba was elected by the people, Estrada Palmer, but Estrada Palmer had no real powers because of the Platt Amendment. And so some of the effects of the Platt Amendment is that one, know the terms of the Platt Amendment and know the effects of the Platt Amendment. Very, very popular question. One, Cuba became controlled by the US. Two, the US had the right to intervene in Cuba. Three, the US took control over the different islands, like the Isles of Pines here and the different islands here, and they established military base on those islands. Also, and city which is right here, Guantanamo Bay, they lease Guantanamo Bay and have control over there. Right? The US set up permanent base, meaning even until today in Guantanamo Bay, the US still settle and control that area. So Cuba now became like a colony of the US, but the US said that they're a protectorate. And trading, the US would have reduced some taxes when it comes to trade. So there's a lot of basically free trade taking place between Cuba and the US. In fact, one historian said, somebody, could you read this for me, what Luis Perez said for me?
There is little or no independence left in Cuba by the Platt Amendment. Historian Luis Perez.
So Luis Perez said, based on the Platt Amendment, there is no independence. Because one, from the war and from the end of the Spanish-American War, you have the military government, and now, even though we can elect our own president, we can't do anything without you sanctioning it. So we have no independence. There is no independence by the Platt Amendment. And so if we want to put a definition to the Platt Amendment, right? We could say the Platt Amendment was a clause placed on the Cuban Constitution in 1902. It gave the United States legal right to intervene in Cuba's internal affairs to prevent disorder and maintain peace and stability. And then Cubans now are saying, but you told us in the Teller Amendment that once there is peace, then you're going to leave. But now you implement the Platt Amendment to our Constitution. And so what is going to take place here? Cubans are going to refuse the Platt Amendment because they say that it limits their independence. And during this time, anytime there was problem in Cuba, the US intervened. So 1906, there was problem in Cuba, the US came. 1912, there was problem, the US came. 1917, the US came. 1920, the US came. Every time there was some form of problem in Cuba where citizens either protest against the government that they would have selected, or they are rebelling against some of the policies of the US military is coming in and they are taking over the government. Right? And so Cubans are now going to start to oppose the Platt Amendment. And they said that they want full independence, they want full freedom. So they went to the streets and they demonstrate, they had rallies, they had marches, they had petitions. And they start to ask themselves, what have we gained from the war? What have we gained from the war? We take up ourselves, we fight 2 times for independence from Spain. But yet still at the end of the day, the Americans have full control over us. What have we gained from the war? And so in 1934, after there was widespread protests in Cuba, the United States said, listen, we are going to repeal, we are going to abolish, we are going to remove the Platt Amendment from your Constitution. You can do whatever you want to do, but guess what? You see this place that is called Guantanamo Bay? We are going to still have control over that area. We're not going to come in and anytime there's a problem in Cuba, we're not going to rush and come in. We're not going to do that. You have control. But once we continue to study Cuba, we're going to see that although the Platt Amendment was removed, they still had control. Very important lesson for today. And I'm going to share with you, I'm posting this PowerPoint in the classroom. Read it with your textbooks. Ladies, very, very important. All right. Any question, any comments?
No, sir.
All right. So, Austin, you have something saying?
No, sir.
All right, ladies. So we return on Thursday, where we continue to talk about Cuba, how the US continue to control Cuba. And these are some very good points for your SBAs for those who did Cuba.
Sir, when is it due again?
Monday.
Okay.
So I said, okay.
Yeah, because I thought it was after exam, you know.
No, Monday.
So you
If you
can
don't
do a
submit
little
that
extension.
If you don't submit the SBA, I'm using the grade that you got before.
No, sir. Okay, sir, I'll do it.
You're going like anybody that go do it in the first place.
Yeah, but I wanted a little more time.
All right, ladies, enjoy the rest of the day.
Bye, sir. Bye, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.